In 1977, a woman walked into a pet store in Chicago and asked the assistant to choose a parrot for her. Not the brightest-looking one, anyone. She wanted to make sure that nobody could later accuse her of having handpicked a gifted bird. The assistant reached into a cage and handed her a 1-year-old African prey. She called him Alex, an acronym for Avian Language Experiment. At that moment, bird brain was a standard insult in English, and among scientists, the phrase bird cognition was very close to an oxymoron. Birds had brains the size of a walnut. They had no neocortex, the folded outer layer of the mammal brain that everyone agreed was where thinking happens. The conclusion followed neatly. There was nothing in there worth studying. 30 years later, that same bird could count to 6, name 7 colors, thought objects he had never seen before, understand the concept of zero, and ask a question about himself. And here is the part this video is actually about. The reason nobody had done any of this before wasn't that Alex was a miracle. It's that nobody had seriously looked. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what science believed about bird brains and why it was so confident. The anatomy looked better. The mammal brain has a neocortex, a layer sheet on the outside, the structure credited with language, planning, and abstraction. The bird brain doesn't have one. Early anatomists looked at it and concluded that almost the entire bird brain was basal ganglia, the region associated with instinct and automatic behavior. Read that literally, and a bird is a machine running reflexes. No layered cortex, therefore no thoughts. It wasn't a prejudice invented out of thin air. It was an inference from anatomy, and it was tough for the parrot had a second problem. Their talent worked against them. A parrot that says hello is obviously copying a sound, so the talking parrot became the perfect illustration of an animal that produces speech without understanding it. The definition of mimicry. And there was experimental support. American behaviorists had tried teaching parrots language using scanner box-style rewards. A machine plays a sound, the bird repeats it, food drop. The results were poor, and the conclusion was published. Parrots cannot be soft language. This is where Irene Pepperberg comes in, and she is not who you'd expect. She had just finished a PhD in chemical physics at Harvard, not zoology. She had watched documentaries on chimpanzee sign language experiment and asked an obvious question that nobody had followed up. If you want to study whether an animal has concept, why choose an animal that can talk and 10 years arguing about its hand gestures? Why not use an animal with a voice? Then read a German ethologist named Dietmar Todd, who had made a sharper criticism. The failed experiment hadn't proved parrots wouldn't learn. They had proved that a bird alone in front of a loud figure doesn't learn, which is unsurprising because that is not how any child learns language either. Children learn from people interacting in front of them. Pepperberg adapted Todd's idea into what she called the modern arrival technique, and it is beautifully simple. Alex is on the perch. Two women stand in front of him. One is the trainer, the other is Bob, the model, demonstrating the behavior wanted, and the rival competing for the trainer's attention. The trainer holds up a piece of wood and asks the assistant, "What is this?" The assistant says, "Wood." The trainer says, "That's right," and hands it over. The assistant gets to chew it, play with it, enjoy it out loud right in front of the parrot. Alex, watching, wants that object badly, and he has just seen the exact price of it. The word say would get wood. Two details make these figures rather than to touch. The humans swap holes constantly, so Alex sees that whoever asks a question can also answer it. The label belongs to the object, not to a person. Second, and this is crucial, the reward is the object itself, never wood. If Alex says wood, he gets wood. If he says key, he gets a key. That closes an obvious loophole. He can't be simple repeating a sound that produces a snack, because different sounds produce different specific things. The word has to mean the thing, and the sections were not a small success story. Funding was refused repeatedly. Pepperberg moves between universities, Purdue, Northwestern, Arizona, Harvard, Penn Days, carrying a parrot with her. For years, reviewers considered the project marginal at best. What Alex accumulated over 30 years is worth stating precisely, because the precision is the whole point. He learned to weekly label more than 50 objects, 7 colors, 5 shapes, materials. He could tell you whether something was wood, paper, or wool. He could count quantities up to 6. Combining his labels, he identified, requested, refused, and categorized more than 100 different items. But a vocabulary list proves nothing on its own. A recording device has a vocabulary. What matters is what he did with it. He handled same and different. Shown 2 objects, he could answer what attribute different: color, shape, or material. He handled bigger and smaller, and critically, he applied these to combinations he had never encountered. Show him a novel object in a novel color and he'd get it right. That is the difference between a memorized response and an abstract category. A memorized answer fails on a new case, an abstract category doesn't. He also refused. He said no. He said wanna go back when he was bored of a session, and the data show his accuracy dropped when he'd said it. He wasn't failing, he was done. When training younger parrots, he would interrupt and correct their wrong answer. And when he was given a task he found too easy, he sometimes produced deliberately wrong answers, every wrong color but the right one, which is difficult to explain as random error and easy to explain as a bird messing with you. One moment is famous among the researchers. Shown on apple for the first time, a fruit he had no word for, Alex called it banana. He knew banana. He knew cherry. An apple tastes a bit like a banana and looks like a giant cherry. He hadn't been taught that word, he had built it. Then comes the moment that question paper still sits. Alex is tested on quantities. A tray. How many? At one point, he is shown a set containing no objects from the requested category. Instead of guessing a number, he responds none. None? No one had taught him this. He had picked up none in an entirely different context, that of them or different pairs, and transferred it on his own to quantity. He used a word of absence to answer how many. This is the gateway to 0, and one must measure the difficulty. 0 is not something you can point your finger at. It is the idea that an absence can be a quantity. In children, this concept only emerged around 4 years of age. His final experiment, published after his death, went even further. He added numbers up to 8 on tasks that were entirely novel to him. There is one episode that everyone remembers. Alex, in front of a mirror, asks what color. He asks about himself. He has no word for gray. They answer him. He repeats it. From then on, he has a name for the color he is. People often speak of this as the first reported case of a non-human animal asking a question about itself. Here, honestly, matters more than emotion. A single even is not an experiment. Pepperberg always distinguished between what was tested and what was observed. Controlled results pass peer review. The mirror question, on the other hand, is what makes people pause. There were critics and not foolish ones. The strongest was the clever horse effect, a horse that seemed to calculate but was actually reading tiny involuntary signals from the humans around him. The lesson holds. An animal that seems to reason might just be reading you. Pepperberg's response was procedural. Tests were conducted by people who had not trained Alex. Scores were scored by observers blind to the question. Novel combinations preventing any learned association from yielding the answer. 3 decades of peer-reviewed results, 200 caveats remain. N equal 1. A single bird does not prove what a species is capable of, and a real debate over interpretation. Neither is the birds are dumb argument. That premise did not survive. Which brings us back to the real question. Not how smart was Alex, but how did we get it so wrong for so long? The answer comes in 2016. A team led by Irene Pepperberg publishes in PNAS the first real neuron count of bird brains by counting cells directly rather than estimating them from size. These brains are small, but their neurons are much smaller and far more densely packed than ours. Parrots and songbirds have roughly roughly twice as many neurons as primates of equivalent brain mass, and almost all of them in the forebrain, the equivalent of our cortex. A macaque carries nearly 1.9 billion, more than a monkey in a fraction of the size. The old claim that this forebrain was merely primitive instinct tissue was simply wrong. The blind spot does has a precise shape. Science had a theory. Thinking requires a layered cortex, birds don't have one. Therefore, they don't think. Nobody checked it against an actual count because the conclusion already seemed to follow. For decades, nobody counted, and an entire branch of intelligence remained invisible. Not because it was hiding, but because the question seemed already answered. On the evening of September 6, 2007, Pepperberg put Alex in his cage. They had said the same thing to each other almost every night for 30 years. He says, "You be good, see you tomorrow, I love you." He is found dead the next morning. He was 31 years old. In captivity, Grace also reached 45. The temptation is to end on that line, but the line is not the point. Alex was chosen at random by an employee from a cage of ordinary parrots. That was the protocol. So this is not the story of an extraordinary bird proving everyone wrong. It is that an ordinary bird did it, and that for a century those in the nerve-boring cage could probably have done the same without anyone ever asking, because the answer was already known. That is what a blind spot truly is. Not a secret, not a conspiracy. A question everyone thought was settled, sitting in a pet shop waiting for someone to ask it again.